Paul, Ludicina, thanks for joining us. Last time we spoke, we were talking about a world out of balance. It seems that the cycle has come back once again. It's still out of balance.
Yes, indeed it is. And I think that the forces that were driving the world out of balance have shifted somewhat, but those forces are still at play. Globalization, demographics, environment and natural resources, changing consumer preference, and increasing activism and regulation. All of those, turbocharged by changes in technology, are still driving lots of change in the world.
So if these are the factors that drive change in the world, we're seeing many of them accentuate in directions that have not been in favor of globalization, including globalization itself. I mean, it certainly had patches of protectionism, which are lurking around the corners still today. Do you think that's likely to change, or this decade is going to be one of caution?
Well, I think it should be one of caution. I think that we were unrealistic to think, as many did in the halcyon days of the 90s, that globalization and integration was an inexorable, ever-increasing proposition. And this is what Alan Greenspan called irrational exuberance. And we know now that globalization will not continue unimpeded. It'll be affected by lots of factors: protectionism, cost of shipping goods, questions about ultimate consumer demand. So the whole global supply chain is in a process of flux and re-examination, and globalization and whether or not it continues uninterrupted will be the big driver.
So in that sense, the concept of opportunity is also evolving on a daily basis, because globalization was really the chase for opportunity at the right place and the right time.
That's correct. But globalization and the integration on which it rests not only bring opportunity, but they also bring vulnerability. And I think in the 90s, everyone was struck with the opportunities associated from integration. And since the turn of the century, it's been more about denominating the risks. And the balance that we need to get to now is all about understanding about how you denominate the opportunities and manage the risks to be able to grow.
What do you think CEOs are most concerned about in today's scenario of globalization, protectionism, or I would say ability to reach out with risk and at the same time be extra cautious because they don't want to jump the gun?
Well, I think they're most concerned about what businesses need to be concerned about, what we all learned about in Biology 101. It's the first law of nature: grow or die. So they need to understand how they can grow, but yet they're overwhelmingly impacted by this sense of pervasive risk. So the principal preoccupation of CEOs today is finding the right growth plays and then being able to understand and manage the risks to be able to seize those growth plays.
You also talk about demographics as a key driver. That brings me to a country like India, which is just full of consumers, and everybody is talking about an 8% growth, which is much lower than what Indian expectations of 10% might have been. But compared to the rest of the world, we're probably on a takeoff zone, you know.
Absolutely.
So in that respect, do you think Indian CEOs have less of a challenge today, but at the same time, they shouldn't overestimate this opportunity?
Well, Indian CEOs have great opportunity, but they also will have challenge because they have to globalize themselves to be able to ensure that they can stay competitive with the other players from outside India who also have an interest in this market. So what we see, obviously, is Indian organizations which have been quite successful growing with the Indian market that now will find challenge as they need to globalize and become and to adopt those best practices which will allow them to stay competitive along with other players in the market.
That certainly includes China. At the start of this recession, there was a talk about how China might end up losing its manufacturing edge at some level because of changes in demand and so on, and that India could benefit on the skill set side.
Sure.
Do you think that's something that might be a bit of a wishful thinking?
No, I think that China, given the very different demographics presented in China with an extremely rapidly aging society, China will lose the price advantage of being the world's biggest manufacturing platform. It will still be among the world's biggest, if not the biggest, consumer platform. So China needs to be aware of, and I believe it is, that it has to shift also with the dynamics which will determine what the competitive situation is for China.
What do you think benefits India, though, from a demographic or a consumer trend point of view?
Well, I mean, I think it's all about the new Indian consumers who are moving up the pyramid. This is a young, upwardly mobile consumer profile. It is a growing consumer market, and it is a market in which consumer demand is more denominated around goods, and goods are what have driven economic growth. So I think this demographic profile that India presents is the fundamental strength of the market. Consumers or investors look for two things when they look at markets. What are the fundamentals of growth, and whether or not there is a sustained opportunity to drive that growth based upon internal demand.
Right. So we've got a 30% population that's almost around 25. That's certainly good in terms of numbers. But what you're suggesting is we get away from volume to value, and that we need to do that quickly in terms of what we deliver for the world.
There's no question. If there's any lesson that the world has learned as a result of the crisis of the last couple of years, is that there was too much attention on creating wealth and not enough attention on creating value. When one creates value, wealth will follow. If one tries to create wealth without the established base of value, then you have the kind of excesses that we saw in the last few years, which ultimately are not sustainable.
So then we do expect a fundamental shift in the way CEOs and strategists look at their markets. I mean, at one stage, I do remember reading your own comments about how you have to have the just do it attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's about we need to know where to put the pause button and when to release it.
Yes. I think it's all about powerfully imagining and rigorously assessing the future to be able to inform the present. We're no better at predicting the future today than we were 15 years ago. In fact, probably even worse because of the rapidity of change. But the benefit of looking over the horizon to try and understand the forces that shape the future is that it informs choices in the present. So the key is being forward-thinking and at the same time being nimble to take advantage of changes in the forces that will shape the business environment.